Well, good day, delegates to the 9th Annual Conference of the South African National Resource Center for the First Year Experience and Students in Tradition. Those words just roll naturally off my lips because I am the founder of a partner and analog organization in the United States, and it's a great honor for me to be here with you virtually, at least today. And I'm going to come back with you tomorrow, I believe at 9:20 your time in the morning, for a conversation session. And I'll look forward to something being more interactive than this will be, but I hope this will engage you nevertheless. I've asked my kind host, Dr. Ancila Nair, to make available to you a copy of the PowerPoint that I'm speaking from for your use in any manner that you deem appropriate. And there will be, I'm not going to be able to cover everything on that today, so there will be some things that I hope you'll want to go back and review. I guess I'm assuming my host will have introduced me before we roll this recording. But I should then perhaps just quickly reintroduce myself. I'm John Gardner. I am a distinguished professor emeritus of library information science at the University of South Carolina, and I am the co-founder of the United States nonprofit organization known as the John N. Gardner Institute for Excellence in Undergraduate Education. And my co-founder is my spouse, Dr. Betsy Barefoot. And speaking of Betsy, Betsy and I both had a wonderful visit to South Africa. I would want you to know that I'm not a total stranger to your really important country. We spent 10 days in South Africa in 2011. Yes, I know that's a while ago. But a week of that we spent in Pretoria with 5 or 6 working days at the University of Pretoria. And that was a very memorable experience, to say the least. And one of the things we did while we were there was appointments were arranged, or no, an appointment was arranged for us with several individuals from the Department of Higher Education for your country, in which we talked about the founding of a national center in the United States, which became a global center, and the history of the so-called first-year experience conferences. And we expressed our hopes that eventually South Africa would create its own version of some kind of national resource center for the first-year experience and students in transition, and that it would regularly convene South educators and perhaps, as you deem appropriate, educators from your entire continent and globally, for that matter, at these kinds of meetings. So this is my opportunity to kind of look back 13, 14 years and think about what has transpired. So this morning I'm going to talk about, or I guess this afternoon for you, I'm going to talk about what I'm calling the South African first-year experience, a component of the global quest for justice for first-year students. That word justice is really important to me. As an undergraduate student myself back in the 1960s, the most important concept that I learned about in undergraduate education was the concept of justice. What did that mean? And my thinking about what might I do in my own career to in some way pursue a life of professional justice. And I think this mission that all of you have by gathering today at this conference, it's related to justice for first-year students in your country. So today, though, I come here and I have to figure out how to advance these slides. There I am. I come to you as the founder of the concept that your center and conference is named for, the so-called first-year experience, which is a concept that I created in 1982. That's 42 years ago. And I want to talk to you about the founding of what became a global movement of which you are an integral part. And obviously, I'm an American higher educator. I'm primarily known for my more broadly work in all of undergraduate education. Today, I hope that I can invite and succeed in encouraging you to think about what is your individual role as an innovator in South African first-year higher education. Every one of you is important to this. Every one of you can make a big difference. And anyone can get an innovative idea and bring it to fruition, as I will show you I have done. You folks in South Africa are a critical component of the global first-year experience movement. And I'm going to show you that you have recently been participants in creating what we're calling a global forum for student success, which will be announced in the next month or so worldwide publicly. And it's my belief that the whole world is watching to see what kind of a society you in South Africa create post-apartheid. And we're hoping that you ultimately do a better job than we have done in the United States in moving beyond our both de jure and de facto apartheid analog, the 300 or so year history of unjust racial discrimination in the United States. But we all want to see how you transform your society, and so far, you've been transforming it more rapidly than we have. So I want to talk to you about how the first year experience movement got started, and then talk to you about what that has resulted in. And I see I unintentionally advanced my slide more than I wanted to. This movement started in 1970 when there was a riot in association with a student protest on a public university campus in one of the 13 oldest states in the United States, the state of South Carolina. This riot took place at the University of South Carolina, which was chartered in 1801. It's the 35th oldest university in the United States. And that riot led to the creation of what we call in the US a course, which I think that the Commonwealth term historically for this in English had been a module. And this course was started in 1982. And that led me eventually to organize what I thought was just a national conference in 1982, which turned out to be, to my surprise, an international conference because we had Canadians come. And we've continued this conference for 42 years. And over those years, a number of South Africans have attended. This riot began, the slide here, the photograph you see on the far left is the oldest part of my campus. We call it the horseshoe because it's inside a wall. You see a photo of part of that wall in the right here. And it was on that open plain area that 1,000 students gathered in the first week of May 1970, right in front of the building in the center, which at that time was used as a club for faculty, of which I was a member. And that building was built in 1814, and I had an office in there for 3 years. Okay, now this protest that was held was part of a series of nationwide protests that manifested one of the key social movements of the United States in the late 1960s and early 1970s, what we call the student protest movement or the student social activist movement. And the upper left photograph is a photograph of the campus in Mississippi, where 2 Jackson State University students were murdered, shot in a protest. The larger photograph on the right is a photograph that went around the world. It's a student absolutely horrified at the death of a university student at Kent State University, where the State National Guard opened fire on the students, killing 4 of them. The photograph on the bottom left is a photograph from Orangeburg, South Carolina, where a riot took place in 1968 with students protesting the continuing racial segregation of a bowling alley 4 years after the American Civil Rights Act. All of this turmoil was the foundation of the so-called first-year experience movement. Now, this riot at the University of South Carolina in 1970, was triggered by this gentleman, former President Nixon, who in this photograph is explaining to the American public and the world what we called a so-called, quote, incursion into the sovereign nation of Cambodia, which was very upsetting to many American college students who were subject to the U.S. draft, as I had been. As a matter of fact, I was drafted in 1966 and served in the American Armed Forces for 2 years. When I was in college, there was a popular poster that students had on their residence hall rooms that had a picture of this individual, and the caption beneath it read, "Would you buy a used car from this man?" Now, I mention this background because I'd like you to think about what kind of convergence are you realizing in South Africa today of various social and political movements that are creating the context for whatever is going on with your students, your universities, your technical education system, and overall for the people of South Africa. At this time, when we gave birth to the so-called first-year experience movement, there were four central movements that converged. One was the anti-war, the anti-Vietnam War movement. We're seeing a replication of this of sorts right now in the United States with the protests against the Israeli attacks in response to the Hamas attack. In Gaza, the second movement that came together was the student rights movements, where students were demanding new privileges and freedoms that they've been previously denied on American college campuses. This was accompanied simultaneously by the women's rights movement and, most importantly, the civil rights movement, which was an outgrowth legally from an act in the American Congress adopted in 1964. All of those created the context for a student riot in 1970. So I want to ask you again, what are the current themes that drive what you and your students are thinking about, concerned about, perhaps angry about? What are you doing? Really important food for thought. Now, at that time, we had a president at my university. There's a photograph of him. His name was Jones. And he wasn't smiling, though, as he was in this photograph, when the students entered his building, took it over, set it on fire. He was barricaded in a sit-in in his office for 24 hours. And he emerged, and I've got a quote from him, where he stated, quote, "The students have given me an extended opportunity to study the meaning of student behavior." And so I want to ask you, when you observe your students, what are they telling you? How often do you take opportunities to literally observe and study them to determine the various meanings of their behavior? Because in this case, he concluded that they were very, very angry. And so then the question of the president became, well, what do I do about this anger? And why did they become angry? And he did what many presidents do when faced with a crisis. President meaning, whatever your term would be, perhaps rector or vice rector, for the chief executive officer of your institution. So what he did was he formed a committee largely composed of faculty. I was not a member of that committee, and they studied the causes of the student riot for 2 years, and the president got very impatient. And finally, he proposed an experiment, and the experiment led to the first-year experience movement. And that experiment was to create a course called University 101 that would be offered to our entering first-year students. It would be graded on what we call a pass-fail basis instead of a numerical or a letter grade. And the purpose was not retention, and we didn't call it student success yet. The purpose literally was to prevent riots. And he believed that we could prevent students from being angry if we taught them to love the university. So we designed an intervention, which I was part of the design, of trying to craft a beginning university experience where students became really excited about being at this university. They would conclude they wouldn't want to be anywhere else. They would respect the university. They would not want to trash it. And literally, it was to teach them to love the university. And we believed that, and I certainly learned this in the American military, that you can teach students, like any other human beings, to do anything you want them to do, to love, to hate, to kill, to help. What do you want your students to do? In this case, we wanted them to love being students. And we eventually discovered, once we taught them to love the university, that they stayed longer. This staying longer is, we call student retention. And that was not ever an original goal of this initiative. It was a byproduct that we discovered. So to launch this course, the university needed a faculty director, and the president chose me eventually as the founding director of this experiment that led to the first-year experience movement. And that's a picture of me in 1974. Wish I could go back to that. I was a very young assistant professor at the University of South Carolina. I had just recently been promoted to assistant professor. And my president, honestly, he told me, John, I'm going to be honest with you. You're not my first choice for this job. You're my third choice. But the first two choices have turned me down. Talk to my dean. I'm sure many of you have deans that you have to maintain their favor and their support. And I knew that before taking this leadership role on in this experiment that I needed to talk to my dean. And I also needed to talk to the woman then who was my wife. So I talked to both of them. They agreed that this would be a good thing for me to do, important for the university and maybe ultimately the country. So I became the director of this initiative in 1974. And my provost, that's our term for chief academic officer, vice president academic, when he saw the successes this course was having with students, he urged me to go out and spread the kind of gospel of University 101. And we did so, and it spread truly, as I've labeled it here, like a contagion. Now, some 7 years later, I was promoted to the highest faculty rank, that what we call full professor. And I was the youngest full professor at the University of South Carolina. And I had to ask, what am I going to do for the rest of my career? Now I can do anything I want. And I realized that if I was going to, maintain my vitality and my energy and my commitment and my joy of the work I was doing with students, I needed to innovate even more broadly than I had. And I couldn't do that unless I did what you all are doing today in Johannesburg, namely learning from each other and getting ideas which hopefully you will use to innovate at your own institutions. So I asked myself, how could I do that? How could I expand my knowledge of this effort on American college campuses to improve the success of beginning college and university students? So I asked myself, well, could I go to a conference and learn more about how to do that? And the answer was no. There was no conference being held anywhere in the United States, or we could identify anywhere in the world focusing on new university students. And so I decided to create one, even though I'd never organized a meeting before. Why should that stop me? And there was no precedent to go by. So with one other person, I organized, and my administrative assistant, I organized the first conference held on this subject of improving the success of first-year students. We held that in Columbia, which is the capital city of the state of South Carolina, in February of 1972. February of 1982. And my goal had been to have 50 people come. And I was vastly exceeded that. We had 173 people attend the first meeting. And to my surprise and pleasure, they also came from Canada. And I say pleasure because as a young boy, I had lived in Canada for 5 years when Canada then was part of the British Commonwealth. And I had had a very good school experience there. So we decided to do a second meeting and to do exactly what you're doing in South Africa right now, to create a community of higher education colleagues who have a common mission to focus on the first-year students and to make them more successful, to create a community of faculty, student affairs, student services, student success professionals, and academic administrators. And this focus on first-year students from those kinds of educators remains the original focus of this meeting, which is held now every year. We just held our 42nd in Seattle. We had 2,000 people attend this meeting from some 14 countries, and this has become a tradition in American higher education. Now, the result of the first meeting, I concluded that there was sufficient and potentially much greater interest in this topic. We needed to continue this kind of convening. We shortened the original name, which I have on the left side of this screen. The first meeting we called a National Conference on the Freshman Seminar Extended Orientation Course Concept, a real mouthful. And so I thought, well, I need to, this is when I had what I'm going to call on this slide, my roller bag or bottled water moment. I'm sure you all use a roller bag when you travel somewhere. Why didn't you think of putting wheels on a suitcase? Why didn't I think of that? I don't know. I just didn't. Why didn't you think of bottling water in, I'm sorry, environmentally unfriendly plastic containers, water being more expensive per ounce than alcoholic beverages, soft drinks, petroleum products. What an incredible invention, bottled water. This was all about innovation. And so innovation comes about when somebody thinks of something somebody hasn't thought about, or if somebody else hasn't thought about it, they haven't done anything about it. So I thought of convening educators initially from the United States and then from around the world to talk about first-year students. Okay. So we decided to come up with a short term that people could remember, and it's the term you're using today. It is now, the term is first year experience. Originally, we called it freshman year experience, and we decided we came up with this term in 1982. We changed the name of this in 1998 when we realized the term was discriminatory against the majority of university students in the United States who are not men, they are women, and who some would argue are not fresh in multiple senses of the term. So we decided to call it a first year experience, the higher education first year experience. So then the question becomes, well, I missed something here. Let's see. What does first year experience mean as a concept? And the way we mean it, and of course, that's just the way we intended to mean it. What matters is how you mean it, and what you want to do as a result of how you define it. We mean it as a philosophy. It's a set of values and beliefs that first year students need to be treated with dignity and respect, and not as an endlessly expendable commodity that can just be washed out and eliminated. So the idea was to provide better treatment for first-year students than they had been treated in the previous 300 years of American higher education. The term first-year experience also became used to define a particular program or intervention, an initiative, some specific set of activities that you offer for your first-year students. In our case, we had this course called University 101, which was our freshman year and then first-year experience program. Now, when I talked about first-year experience, I meant a philosophy. I meant a national and global effort to improve the attention that new students received. I didn't necessarily mean a program, but many people who began imitating and using this concept thought that what I meant was a program or an intervention. Well, that's fine, because the term was designed to be used any way anybody wanted to use it. It was designed to describe a set of foundational experiences that students experience early in the post-secondary, the tertiary experience. In most cases now, the FYE, the acronym, describes some kind of initiatives, the goal of which is increasing the number of students who move from the first year to the second year, who are then, quote, retained. At the majority of American institutions, the first year experience describes a course, meaning a module. The original term for this is a first-year seminar that teaches students how to be successful in university. The term also stands for this conference series, which we've had many South Africans attend, and it describes a national center at the University of South Carolina, which I founded in 1987 specifically. FYE is also a registered trademark owned by the University of South Carolina, which we use to protect any who might steal it for commercial purposes and do inappropriate things with it. And the term describes a set of curricular, academic, and co-curricular, non-credit experiences that we offer students. Some of the most common of those, we try to identify what we call common experiences. And we think that if you focus on what are the most common components of the beginning university experience, That is, if you focus on them for efforts to improve them, you're more likely to improve the overall student experience. So what are some of the common experiences then that we look at? Well, I hate to say it, but on American campuses, one of the most common experiences is parking, automobiles. You're in South Africa, that is less of a challenge for you because not as many of your students have automobiles. The process where students select their courses and they register for those courses, their sharing of the food that the institution provides. And I learned 14 years ago when I was in Pretoria that food security is a major challenge for your students as well as housing security. And it is on many American campuses for our students as well. Another key component of the common experience, the common components of the first year are how do students get advice about the decisions they need to make. Many campuses will have a welcoming and introductory experiences where they ask students to read something in common and then discuss that reading. They will have various rituals, ceremonies, customs that they introduce students to the experience. They create what I'm calling here campus ethos statements. These are statements of core values, core beliefs, certain rules and policies, in particular regarding academic integrity. The upper right here, the top one that I've selected, is the most common thing that we ask all new students to do in American universities. We call these gateway courses, the courses they must take at the beginning university experience. And then there's what we call orientation. How do we orient students to the university? Most campuses have an initial orientation of, it varies anywhere from a few hours to a few days to a whole full academic term. Many American universities now, about 80% have some form of orientation that carries academic credit, which applies to degrees. Another component of the common entering experience is a convocation from the Latin, meaning calling students together and giving them hopefully an inspirational message. And another common experience for many students, but not the majority of America's students, are the experiences they have in residence halls of residence. And here's a slide of a student carrying some essential commodity, looks like a refrigerator to me, into a residence hall. So the question we encourage you to ask is, what should be the common experiences that you want all South African university students to have? And if you want them to have these experiences, do you make them do certain things when they start university? And that you don't allow them to exempt out of or test out of. It's absolutely required. Versus what do you offer new students that are what we call elective or optional? They don't have to do it. And of course, we as educators, we get to make these choices. And that's where we see some significant cultural differences around the world. And that's where one of the things that's most important for you to continually evaluate in South Africa is what do you make all students do versus some students, and what do you make optional? Now, some of the things we know about the American first year experience that we can contrast with yours are the following, and that is that ours is very old. We've had a beginning university experience since 1636. That was at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The first year experience in the United States takes many different forms. It has lots of different outcomes. It's something that only recently, starting in 1964, has been racially and gender integrated. The first gender integrated institution in the United States, allowing women to join men, was in 1835. And so for less than half of our higher education history as a nation, we have only been admitting men. Thank goodness we gone beyond that. One of the main points here is that whatever the first year experience is in your country or mine, we create this, we determine it. There's no world standard for this. Unfortunately, one of our characteristics is that we have a very high rate of unsatisfactory performance, high failure rates, high rates of students dropping out of university. If we look at all American college students, about 75% of them in baccalaureate institutions will persist to a second year. in our two-year so-called community colleges, approximately 50% of them do not go on, at least initially, after the first year. One of the things the FYE concept was trying to change was the low status of the beginning student experience, the low regard that they and what we did for them was held, and the fact that it wasn't a high priority concern. That is definitely no longer the case. One of the biggest and most important outcomes of the first year experience movement in the United States certainly has been that on every campus, what's done for first year students is a matter of high priority. We pay a lot of attention to this. We devote a lot of resources to it. And that meant we had to ask, and this is a question I would urge you to constantly ask, what's the purpose of the first year in South Africa? What is the purpose of the first year at your particular institution? Historically, the way we organized the first year in American higher education, a key purpose was to make money. I mean, what's more American than making money? So we organized large classes for the newest students. We, in effect, gave them a kind of mass experience, and so that it was done very inexpensively, so that the first year in any university would be a net revenue generator, what we call a cash cow. And another simultaneous purpose was to get rid of a lot of students. There was a belief that, yeah, we may have to admit them, but we don't have to keep them. And what's more, we believe that many of them shouldn't be here, and therefore we'll do our best to flunk them out. Now, that's not the current philosophy, but it was at many institutions until the early 1980s. And part of that was addressed by the continuing civil rights movement, which urged Americans to treat students differently who had been historically so discriminated against. Another objective historically of the first year beginning experience in college was to make it so that powerful people who work at universities, the full professors like me, never have to teach them. They don't have to deal with them. And so we passed this off to younger, newer, lower ranking members of the academy. And we still see some of that. But these are some of the things we were trying to change. Now, to do this, we believe that a lot of things, but that you have to know your students. And so a critical question in your work in South Africa is, what do you know about students? And what do you know about your students, about their characteristics that is factually based? You have evidence to support that versus what are your kind of perceptions of your students, which may include prejudices about some of your students. So there's a difference between what individual educators, like all of us in the room where you're watching and listening to this, what you know, it may be different from what your institution at large knows about your students and what they know or think they know in order to create policies. Now, one of the things we've been trying to do then is to get the leaders of American colleges, and I would hope South African universities, to better understand who your students are and then create policies and practices to make these students successful based on who your students actually are. Now, I've got three categories of students here, the way people look at their students. Some educators look at students the way they think they used to be, the students we used to have. I mean, do you think you still have some educators in South Africa who remember and look fondly at the students you have, or had rather, before you ended apartheid? Do you have some educators who look at your students and contrast them with the students they'd rather have, as opposed to the ones they do have? Let's hope that increasingly we're looking at the students we really do have. So whatever you're doing for first year students, it has to be based on the knowledge you have about them, you and your institution. And so what you have to understand, what are the experiences your students having? And students writ large versus students as we break them down into various subpopulations, because those subpopulations will have different experiences, and you need to understand those experiences. Okay, so how do you go about knowing your students? And I've got little thumbprints here, or key tabs. You come to know your students by advising them, by hiring and supervising them, living with them. I remember when I was a young faculty member for a couple of summers, I lived in residence with students. I didn't get much sleep, but I certainly learned a great deal about them. You administer surveys to them. You convene focus groups where you ask them questions and they're able to anonymously respond to those questions using focus group technology, polling technology. A great way I find to get to know students is to read their writing, is to have them write about the university experience. And oh my goodness, they will say things in that they won't say in class. You learn from students by attending events with them, by simply watching them, most importantly, to talk to them and to look at the data that your institution collects on them. And a way that increasingly we are learning about our students is to involve more and more of our students in helping us teach other students, what we call peer leaders, peer teachers. And these are students who are slightly older and more advanced than beginning students. And we partner with them in certain courses, and we learn from the student peer leaders much more about how the students are responding and what they're experiencing. Now, so where do you go on a university campus for the kind of data you need in order to create the policies you need? Well, we have what we call institutional research staff. These are the staff, the researchers, the administrators that study the characteristics of your students, collect data on them. Some campuses have whole units that's all they do. They're collecting and analyzing that data. You can find a lot of that information in your library and of course online, and you can find it globally. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So there's various types of data and evidence that in the first year experience movement, you want to look at in terms of all students, the entire first year population, that's the aggregate population. And then you want to disaggregate the population. So you break it down by gender, race, ethnicity, income, field of study, where they went to secondary school, what country they came from, et cetera. You have census data that you can learn from. You administer surveys. I know your national government, your Department of Higher Education and Training collects data. You definitely need to understand the demographic characteristics of your students. I was very struck when I visited the University of Pretoria 14 years ago that you had a higher proportion of students there then that prior to apartheid would not have been allowed to attend that institution than any elite selective admissions university in the United States. You had come further as a country in integrating one of your most prestigious selective institutions than we had in any in the United States. And we still don't have any university that has that higher a proportion of students who were previously prohibited by law from experiencing post-secondary education in the United States. Family data will tell you a great deal. Family income, if your students take national standardized exams, they're what you call marks in secondary school. By looking at if you admit students on probation, how do they perform, your institutional retention data, graduation data. What I'm calling on this slide, voluntary attrition data, that's something we spent a huge amount of time studying. Why do students voluntarily leave the university? The majority of students who leave our universities, we're not suspending them, we're not expelling them. They're getting discouraged, disappointed, homesick, upset, angry. They're leaving voluntarily, and it's that voluntary attrition that we're most focused on trying to prevent. Another form of data, of course, is what happens to students after graduation. Where are they employed? What are they earning? We're very concerned about what happens to the debt that students acquire and how many of them default on those loans. We are interested, of course, in how the degrees that we award vary over time. What's popular now versus what was popular when some of us were in university, and the trend lines. And most recently, we're very concerned with the differences we see in student performance pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. And we're finding therein this phenomenon now that we're calling lost learning. the tremendous learning gaps experienced by students whose education was disrupted during the most intensive period of the pandemic. Okay, now another way to look at your students in the first year, and I assume you talk some about this at your conference, I certainly hope you do, but every university has a story. The story is drawn from its history. When was it founded? Who founded it? How was it organized? Who was it founded for? What traditions have developed over decades? And how does all of that align with how you want your institution to be thought of today? Who was your institution started for? What kinds of students were you originally focusing on? Versus who do you have as your students now? Very important for us to understand who benefits the most from the educational experience you offer. What kinds of students are most successful? Who doesn't get as much attention? Who gets left out? We make a distinction between whether or not institutions in the United States are what we call access institutions. These are institutions where historically, we believe we'll just admit them, and then we'll let them sink or swim on their own, see how they fare, and if they don't make it, okay, so what? Goodbye. And what's happened is that we've been transforming as many of our institutions as possible from simply providing access to being institutions that are organized to create people to be successful. And we know that access institutions have different policies and different cultures than success institutions. Another phrase we're using widely in our work in the States is to ask, is your institution student ready? Another one is student friendly. Well, what does an institution look like that's ready for the students you've actually got versus you're not really ready? You're not yet prepared yet for what's already happening. So anyway, now one of the most important things I want to say to you is that no matter where you are in the development of a first year experience, a first year set of initiatives to improve the success of first year students, you cannot understand that the majority of the colleagues, the administrators and the faculty and the staff in your university necessarily understand why the first year is important, why it matters. Why should your university, why should your national government be making a bigger investment in what kinds of resources are provided for first year students? If you can't explain that, and if you can't get people to understand that, you're not going to advance the status of the first year experience. So why does the first year matter? Well, you need to have your own script as you work to increase the support for your first year initiatives. But here's my script. The first year, it's a foundation. It's like the foundation of anything anyone's trying to build. And whatever gets ultimately built is built on that foundation. If we're to know at all what we've accomplished in higher education, we have to have data and evidence about what the students were like when they entered. And then we have to have data on what they're like when we finish with them. So the first year is the baseline for measuring student characteristics. It's also the period when your students whose previous education was, primary and secondary education, they've had no experience with higher education. So it's a period when they develop attitudes towards higher education writ large, but also your institution in particular. And those attitudes are the basis of behaviors that they direct. Behaviors like, do they come to class or not? Do they respect your property? They engage in vandalism. There are a whole variety of outcomes that are based on attitudes. And the original philosophy in the first year experience movement was that this is a philosophy that we're trying to get students to develop more positive attitudes towards being first year students in universities. And those are attitudes they learned from faculty and staff who model those attitudes and beliefs and who provide experiences that students are going to enjoy and they're going to be successful. The first year is also important because when we're trying to increase what we now call retention, the continuing persistence of enrolled students, the key time to do that is in the first year. That's when during or after the first year, is when we have the largest voluntary dropout. The first year is also extremely important because it's a time period. It's a range of experiences that students have where they either do or don't learn and acquire the skills and the habits they need to become successful college students. They learn how to read textbooks, they learn how to prepare for class discussions, they learn how to take notes, they learn how to study for tests, they learn how to prepare for an essay exam differently than from an objective or multiple choice or true-false quiz. They learn all these skills, or they're not going to be nearly as successful. In my country, it's the period when students decide and make decisions about what is going to be their course of study, what discipline or field or professional vocation. I don't know how much latitude you offer in South America for students to, in South Africa, to make those decisions. Many universities based on the Commonwealth European models require students to make that decision before they actually enter a university. We allow our students to change their major, even though it generally means that finishing the baccalaureate degree takes longer. But whether you allow them to choose that major before or you allow them to choose it during the first year, they're going to need help doing that. They're going to need help thinking through, is this really the right field for me? Am I suitable for this? Do I have the inclination, the talents to eventually be successful in this? Now, a great deal of the effort in the first year experience in the United States right now is focusing on the development of relationships. How do students develop relationships with other students, most importantly with faculty and staff, because we know that students who develop successful relationships are those that are more successful in college. So that's a big goal to accomplish that in the first year. We also know that some students, many students actually, develop certain behaviors in the beginning university experience, which they carry over into lifelong adult behavior. Do they vote? Are they interested in government and politics? Do they become civically aware? Do they want to perform service to various populations and to the country? How do they manage alcoholic beverages, drug use? They're just all kinds of behaviors that get developed during the university experience. And that starts in the first year. So we have to focus a lot on behavioral choices. This is the period, if you're a university student attending a residential university and you've separated from your family, this is a critical period when students begin to differentiate from the values they've learned in their family and the immediate influences of family. So another way of looking at the first year in terms of why it matters, it's the period when the students engage in, I'm going to use a kind of, well, not inflammatory, but it's a somewhat extreme phrase. First-year students engage in high-risk experiences, and those high-risk experiences are taking courses, modules, in which there's a high probability they're going to fail. And we call them in the United States the gateway courses. So a great deal of our effort to improve student success is focused on improving their experience in gateway courses in English and history, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, political science, mathematics, definitely, writing, the language that you want your students to speak, et cetera. The first year experience is where you get the most of those obstacles, barriers for students that they have to be able to overcome in order to persist. In American higher education, in a few countries in the world, we call this beginning first year experience, we call it general education, and it's differentiated from the specialization that students get in their major, or what often is called their course. And general education is a set of required courses that student must take. They're outside the student's discipline. Okay, so you got to be able to articulate why the first year matters, and you need your own reasons for this that are unique to your institution. Now, I wanted to inform you about something that will be a resource for you, be absolutely free, and that you will be able to contribute to. There are a group of us, about 24 of us, to be more precise, who began meeting informally in 2024. And we formed an informal organization known as the Global Forum, F-O-R-U-M, for Student Success. And 2 of the 24 educators came from South Africa. And they are your very own, Dr. Ensel and I are. I want to thank again for inviting me to do this talk. and Dr. Entabe Yakud from the University of Pretoria. And we have educators from these other countries: Australia, Canada, Colombia, Ireland, Portugal, Singapore, the United Kingdom, both England and Scotland, and the United States. And this group has been meeting every month or so for 4 years now to try to create some kind of global support mechanism to help educators around the world who want to improve the first year experience. And we originally came together, at least the Americans that are involved in this, as kind of a reaction against former President Trump's effort to make everything Americans do around making America first, a kind of retreat from the rest of the world. We decided that's exactly what we don't want to do. And so we asked ourselves, how could we reach out with other educators from around the globe to focus on something common that's of concern to most all of our nations, which is the beginning university experience. And one of the things we've been doing, and we're going to launch for you and share with you, is a global typology involving different concepts and definitions of student success that vary by nation state and culture. Those of us in this global forum, we believe, we have a philosophy that believes that higher education and access to it should be a basic human right available to all citizens of the nation, and not something that's reserved for a more privileged, smaller minority. And thus, if you view it as a basic human right, like healthcare and preschool education for very young children, that you see this as a form of sustainability, that it's necessary for societal sustainability. The Global Forum will have a website, and that's going to be hosted, at least its platform, on the platform of the nonprofit organization of which I'm the co-founder, the Gardner Institute. Most importantly now, this Global Forum is going to offer experiences and information at no cost. Nobody's going to be selling you anything, okay? There's no proprietary, component to this. And we're going to have a lot of resources that people are going to contribute. They'll be on our website free. And we're going to be announcing this in the next month or so. So what I did in preparation for this talk was I asked members of this Global Forum for Student Success, and this is why I've asked Dr. Nayar to make a copy, an electronic or paper copy of this PowerPoint available to you so you can review this information, because I can't go through all of it in a shorter talk like this. I've collected perspectives from each of these nations that are members of the Global Forum for Student Success, giving you some essential themes of what is the first year experience focus in that particular country. So here's a comment from a gentleman from Carleton University, which is in Ottawa, Ontario, giving you a big overview of a nation of 30-some million people and what they're doing. And the most important thing is that, regrettably, there's not a national coordinated approach to the first year experience. It's happening at the province level, the 10 provinces of Canada. But Canada, the first year experience globally that's most similar to the United States, that would be in Canada. And this work there in Canada dates back to the 1970s. So they've been working on this for about 50 years. Here's a second slide with additional information on the Canadian first year experience, and suggesting that many of the things that we in Canada are called FYE are optional. They're not required for all students. And one of the trends that I've seen in 50 years in the United States is often what have started out as optional FYE initiatives gradually become required. And this slide is reporting that many of these Canadian FYE approaches use what are called high impact practices. That is a set of 11 strategies that have been promoted and expounded upon by an American organization called the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, the high impact practices. And the Canadian institutions are making great effort to use most of these, if not all of the 11 high impact practices. One of the 11 high impact practices is the University 101 type first year seminar that I talked about earlier in this session today. So let's see, the next statement here I got from a colleague at Abertay University in Scotland, and the Scottish are really being very assertive. They've organized a regional within a country, what they call the Scottish First Year Experience Network, and they are, as a matter of fact, they're organizing a conference, which if any of you wanted to attend this, you could do so free online. It's going to be one day, 6 hours. And if you're interested, you can write me and I'll send you the information about how to register for this. And it's no charge. But you'll see some of these are the themes that they will be talking about there. Moving on, very interesting correlation in Portugal between the participation in higher education and the end of dictatorship. When you have a dictator for your country, dictators tend to feel that too much education will liberate people, and we certainly don't want that. So in Portugal, after it ended its dictatorship, the extent of participation, as this slide indicates, in higher education went up dramatically. But much of what's going on in Portugal is very, very recent. And that's true a lot of the first year experience activities. And you see here on this slide that the government in Portugal has just in 2023 created a fund to increase first year success. And this is $20 million for the whole country. That's 20 million euros more than they were investing before. Another very interesting global example of this is the very small nation of Taiwan, who the leaders and, well, not only the leaders, but the participants at large in Taiwanese higher education realize that the evolution and the protection and strengthening of their democracy is directly related to what they're doing in the higher education, and that must start in the first year. And their government has just created a multi-year initiative that's being funded and measured in US dollars, 1.3 million a year, to develop an initiative initially at 11 universities. It's going to be expanded in its second phase to 18 universities. It's going to provide faculty development for 400 faculty, particularly on adopting teaching methods that will be more effective for students. And it's going to redesign 149 required first-year courses across 7 disciplines, primarily in the humanities and the social sciences, where enrollments have been declining worldwide, but are still deemed to be essential for having vibrant democracies, to understate the matter. Australia, I regard as one of the real global leaders in the first year experience movement. I've got 2 slides here, and you can read they're detail heavy, but I want to call your attention very intentionally to what's going on in Australia. So I have to ask you, I don't have to, excuse me, I want to ask you, it's my understanding that here's I just talked about Taiwan. They're establishing a national center there for the first year experience. We're seeing the same kind of activity underway in all these other countries. What is going to be the plan for the future efforts to improve the first year experience in South Africa after the discontinuation of the South Africa National Center for the first year experience? Who is going to convene professional development opportunities for first-year educators? Who's going to serve as a primary source of advocacy for first-year students? Who will serve as a primary resource center for information that's designed to inspire and support educators from all of South Africa? Those are the questions that you get to answer. I believe fundamentally that actually, I before I get into this conclusion, I've got only a couple of minutes here, but I did want to go back here. Let's see if I can. Oh my goodness, I have lost my ability here to. Well, no, I haven't. I want to give you quickly a list of the things that I believe are most important to do for the first year, and I could give you much more than this, but most of all, increasing the amount of resources, primarily from the government, to support families and their students to attend university, redesigning high failure rate courses, realigning the pedagogies we use with something other than the traditional European lecture method that doesn't work very well with students today, and to use pedagogies that align with the realities of how today's students actually learn. And we can't do that if we don't provide more support, resources, and money for faculty development. And we also have to realign the way we reward our faculty, not only for publications and research and professional services, with what they actually do to increase student success. And we have to identify and eliminate all the internal policies we still have and human barriers that are obstacles to student success. And that means we have to practice much more rigorous assessment to identify these barriers and to ascertain what has to be done to eliminate them. So those are kind of my top priorities. We've got to use this assessment to make decisions with. And we have to improve orientation, advising, career planning. We have to infuse what we call academic support, not just in tutoring and learning centers, but actually into the classroom and integrating it with the actual pedagogies. We have to provide student success modules or courses like University 101 in the first year. We have to make much greater use of peer leaders because they have such a huge impact on students. And we have to reward the practice of innovation. So in conclusion, I believe that justice for first-year students, which is the central guiding philosophy of the first-year experience movement globally and in South Africa, is necessary. It's critical to have a successful higher education system. Unless you're more successful in the first year, your whole higher ed system cannot be more successful. And that you need this for a vibrant South African democratic way of life, which will be based in part on a just system of higher education. And to remind you, the rest of the world who knows anything about your history is so hoping that you're going to become a model for significantly increasing the levels of student success after the ending of apartheid. So this is a global challenge. It's a global movement. And you folks are global players. And we invite you to participate in the Global Forum for Student Success, which you'll be able to do at no cost. And the folks in Taiwan are they're going to be offering things. You're going to be invited to participate in the Scottish network. I can get you an invitation to sit in on that. That's coming up in about a month. And I will look forward to our conversation tomorrow, which I hope many of you will join and that you'll come and ask me whatever you want, share reactions. I want to thank you all for the honor of the invitation. I wish I could have been there in person, but this seemed to be the most practical way to do this. I hope I've given you some things to think about, and I trust Dr. Nair will get you a copy of this PowerPoint so that you can examine it with more care, because I truly didn't cover it. So enjoy the rest of your conference. I wish you well. I wish I was there. I know what a big difference these can make for what ultimately people like you do for first-year students. So best wishes. I look forward to being with you tomorrow. Thank you very much.